A lot of people have been asking me how I feel about the Hive Scum class, and my honest answer is that if I could frolic hand in hand through a field of flowers with this class, I would. I love it. This is the most fun I've had in Darktide in a long time. But I also know that not everyone feels that way about Hive Scum. In fact, a lot of people feel frustrated by it and like they can't find their footing. And that's reasonable. It's got a weirder playstyle, which just so happens to be the ADHD squirrel on meth style that I've always played Tide games with. So today, I'm going to go over some basics that will hopefully help get you going if you feel like you're struggling with the Hive Scum but really want to enjoy it, and I'm going to go over the build that I've been using. This isn't a video for how to make Hive Scum work for things like Havoc 40 or anything like that, but hopefully it will be helpful if you are just trying to see if there's a secret to make it more enjoyable and maybe would like to clear Havoc 25 for the pants someday. Let's dive in. Obey my cat! Hit the subscribe button. Like I said in the intro, in my opinion, Hive Scum is a little bit different in how most people approach gameplay, especially in melee situations. It has to do with how often you're using one of the fundamental core mechanics of Darktide, and that's dodging. Hive Scum thrives when you apply what is genuinely my personal motto and the way that I have always played these games, which is ABD. Always be dodging. It's such a simple thing, but this is a crucial mechanic that is not only a fundamental for up-leveling your overall mastery at Darktide, but it's also probably the most core feature the class was designed around for combat. Fatshark's devblog introducing the Hive Scum class design says, in both ranged and melee, the core idea behind the Hive Scum is a very mobile, aggressive style that emphasizes dodging, maintaining the offensive as you dance in and out of attacks while showering the enemies in a hail of bullets or blows. It's like a I don't need to block, I don't need to be big and strong because I am so fast and precise you will never hit me type of deal. So for Hive Scum, we really leaned into those aspects. That tells us something really important. The Hive Scum class is meant to be precise, especially on their movements, which is a really difficult skill to master in Darktide. Learning when to start dodging gunshots based on muzzle flashes, getting confident enough to rely on sound cues for if enemies may be behind you and about to strike, knowing when to dip and weave around a crusher to avoid their overheads, these are all more advanced level skills that is going to make the gangers feel more difficult to find your footing in. But that doesn't mean the answer to Hive Scum is just, well, get good. It's still very possible to play this class and enjoy it while working on these more advanced skills like precision dodging. One of the reasons I love the Hive Scum so much is that they bring a really diverse and unique talent tree to the table that allows you as a player to really specialize in just one type of combat or branch out into each one of the Hive Scum specializations and make yourself an all-rounder powerhouse. And that's exactly what I've done for how I choose to play the class. I call this build the ultimate Hive Scum because it does a little bit of everything the class has to offer. If you're struggling with getting smacked around, caught in hordes, crushed by armor, or getting shot to pieces in seconds with this class, but really want to find a way to play it that feels enjoyable, this build might be for you. Let's start with the loadout. My preferred melee weapon are the Mark I shivs. These are the ones with the screw pattern handles. Choosing a dump stat on them was difficult because honestly, I find all of them useful, but in the end, I opted to dump mobility over first target damage. Mobility does slightly affect your dodge distance, dodge limit, and sprint speed, but I find the talents I take in my tree and my cartel special stim overall counteract any minor losses I may take in mobility by dumping this stat on my shivs. Since the shivs are assassin profile weapons for damage, this means that they're best suited for single target damage considerations and don't have a ton of cleave naturally on their own. Keeping first target leans into this and helps you have a higher chance of dropping enemies the first time you hit them. For shiv perks, I selected the tier 4 25% increased damage against carapace armored enemies. This helps me punch down common problem enemies like crushers and maulers and their weak spot targets, which is their heads, but their helmets protecting their noggins are carapace armor. I personally combine this with an extra 10% damage against all elite enemies, since their armor profile tends to vary between carapace, maniac, unyielding, and flak armor types, so I'm just getting a blanket bonus to every type of enemy in the elite pool. You could easily swap this out with a different perk that helps you do a bit of extra damage against any enemy you have a specific pain point with, like unyielding if you find yourself face to face with Reapers more often than you'd like, or even just an increase on critical hit chance or crit damage if you want to stack your crits even further. When it comes to blessings for the shivs, since I am constantly dodging when I am engaged in melee combat, I take Riposte, which gives me a 20% crit chance for 6 seconds on a successful dodge, and Precognition, which gives an extra 45% finesse damage for 2 seconds on a successful dodge. This means that I almost always have an extra 20% chance to score a critical hit when I'm in melee combat, and any crits or weak spot hits are going to be even more effective because finesse damage acts as a multiplier on critical and weak spot hits. Shivs are already no slouch when it comes to clearing out hordes of trash mobs with their high attack speed and single target damage. Building out this dual melee weapon to stack damage against tankier enemies, on top of extra damage you'll be dishing out consistently if you're leaning into dodging as a core mechanic for how you play Hive Scum, means that you'll also be capable of taking down specials and elites without breaking too much of a sweat. But when a large pack of armor moves in, sometimes it's too much for you to want to engage with in melee, and that's where my ranged weapon comes in. The needle pistol is an unusual type of ranged weapon because when you hit enemies with the actual quote-unquote bullet, or in this case needle, that projectile itself doesn't really do any damage. Instead, it injects enemies with a chemical that starts doing massive damage over time to them. Depending on how much health the enemy you've hit has, they will die in a time span from almost instantly to, you should probably keep running for a minute. Some people think that this sounds like it sucks at face value. Why use a ranged weapon that doesn't actually kill enemies immediately on impact? The reason why I love the needle pistol is because it allows you a lot of versatility and breathing room on the battlefield. When I see a pack of crushers moving into my team's position, the first thing I do, as long as I'm not actively caught in heavy melee combat, is to pull the needle pistol and start popping a needle into as many of the heads of crushers as I can. Even though the projectile itself doesn't do any real damage, the damage over time applied by the toxin is still multiplied by the normal weak spot and critical hit modifiers. So in an entire pack of crushers, if you can drop even 1 or 2 of them before they reach you and your team, you're reducing the amount of enemies you have to fight by 10, 30, 50% depending on the mission difficulty you're playing. And the beauty of this is that if you're in a situation where armor is moving in from the front while the horde is incoming at your back, you hit the armored enemies with your needle dots, swap to your melee weapon, and start turning the trash mobs behind you into maggot chunks while the crushers either die outright from your chems or get taken down to a low HP that they're much easier for your team to clean up. Most ranged weapons struggle with taking down carapace enemies in just a few hits or dealing consistent heavy damage to monstrosities. The needle pistol answers these ranged weapon shortcomings by continuing to deal a lot of damage to tougher adversaries even after you've put the weapon away. Now there are 2 marks of the Branks needle pistol and they are not created equal. The reason why I use the Mark II specifically is because it has a much more robust alternate fire mode. When you use the pistol's weapon special, it changes your mode of fire from the yellow light at the top of the gun to the blue light at the bottom. The yellow light mode means your shots apply chem damage that does a lot more damage over time to a single target. When your needle pistol is in blue mode, your shots have a chem dot that does a lot less damage overall. However, when the target dies, they explode. If you're using the Brank Mark VI needle pistol, when the target explodes on death, it does a larger explosion that that does a minimal amount of damage to other enemies around it and staggers them. But on the Branks Mark II needle pistol, enemies that explode on death when hit by shots in the gun's blue mode leave behind a gas where they exploded that applies more chem dots to other enemies near them. And this does considerably more damage to enemies than the splash explosion from the Mark VI. With the way hordes are usually filled out, you'll typically see a lot of trash mobs moving in first, with tougher enemies either behind them or mixed in. So if you use the blue firing type on your needle pistol and lay into the poxwalkers with it, you'll be creating a wall of more chem dots that tougher enemies have to go through in order to reach you, whittling their health down a little bit before they even get into your threat range. Ultimately, I find that much more valuable than a smaller explosion splash with a stagger. When it comes to building my needle pistol, currently either damage or stopping power is the dump stat you'll want to use because it only affects the damage of the actual projectile itself, not your chem damage over time. This may change in the future, but as of early December 2025, about a week out from the release of Hive Scum, that's currently how the gun works. If for some reason you want to choose a different dump stat, that's obviously up to you, but I would caution you to never select stability, as this gun has accuracy issues with the shots sometimes going wildly off target. I take the tier 4 perk for 25% increased damage to unyielding enemies for extra boss and monstrosity damage because adding a huge amount of dots to burn them down is insanely helpful and can even let you solo bosses reliably if you're in a situation where you need to clutch. For my second perk, I take 10% increased damage against elites, but again, this can easily be traded out to address any pain points you may specifically have with enemies or how you want the weapon to behave, like extra damage against carapace for crushers or reload speed if you want to be snappier on how quickly you output damage. For blessings, I chose to put Glory Hunter on to give 25% toughness replenishment on elite kills. This blessing is specifically here on this build to help answer some of the squishy factor that the Hive Scum has attached to it. Replenishing toughness and general survivability is a common complaint I hear amongst players trying to get their footing in this class, so as you'll see on my weapons and also in my talent tree selections, I try to stack as much toughness replenishment as possible, so even if something ends up landing a hit on you through all of your dodging, you stand a better chance at not going down in 1 to 2 slap-a-bamas. And since I use the needle pistol as a weapon to dump dots into elites when they're on the field in large numbers, then turn my attention to other immediate threats if there are any, this also means that you may find yourself replenishing toughness while actively in combat with other enemies off the maulers and crushers that you dumped half a clip of needles into and took a few seconds to burn down. My other blessing is Point Blank, again playing off the idea that I am not frequently relying only on my ranged weapon. If there are packs of trash or even a minimal amount of elites in melee range of me, I'm fighting those enemies in melee. I want to get them out of my face, clear my immediate danger zone, then transition back to my gun to start popping dots into gunners, armored enemies, or anything that could pose a significant threat to our team that's further away. Since the chem damage over time is multiplied by critical hits, choosing to increase my crit chance after a melee kill synergizes with my preferred playstyle, making it more likely I'll be killing significant threat enemies faster and in fewer shots. When it comes to Curios, how you choose to build these will probably be determined by knowing how the math on them works. Yes, I said math, don't worry, there's not going to be a quiz at the end of the video. The blessings on Curios, like the toughness increase that will be somewhere between 13 and 17%, are calculated as an additive percentage, while Curio perks, which are the damage resistances you can manually choose, are calculated multiplicatively. What the hell does that mean? Let's break it down. For toughness, a Hive Scum character with no talents or curios or anything else applied has a base toughness value of 75. I have 3 curios that all give extra toughness, and they give 16%, 15%, and another 15%. That means to calculate how much extra toughness I get on top of my base value of 75, I add 15 plus 15 plus 16 for a total of 46%. We can tell that I really am getting an extra 46% toughness in game because when I put on all 3 Curios, my toughness is now 110. If you take 75 and multiply it by 0.46 for 46%, that gives us 34.5. Round this up to 35 because most of the time when you have a number that isn't round, then Darktide rounds it up, and now add 35 to 75, which gives you a total of 110. Calculating the percentage increase in this way is called additive percentages. But on Curio perks, those do calculate multiplicatively, which actually gives you diminishing returns specifically when it comes to damage resistance from any particular type of damage. To explain this with easy math, let's pretend for a minute that snipers in Darktide do 100 damage directly to your health each time they hit you. To mitigate this, you select 20% damage resistance against snipers on all 3 of your Curios. If perks were also calculated additively, you would have a blanket 60% damage reduction against snipers. 20% from 3 Curios added together would create a total of 60%, so when one hit you, instead of taking 100 damage directly to your health, you would only take 40 damage. We get this number by multiplying 100 by our percentage value of 0.6 to represent 60%, giving us 60. When we subtract 60 from 100, it gives us a total of 40. But since these damage resistances work multiplicatively, your first Curio is protecting you from taking 20 damage of the 100 you would normally take because 20% of 100 is 20. Your second Curio calculates the 20% damage resistance it provides based on the 80 hit points of damage the sniper shot now does to you instead of 100. So instead of knocking off another 20 points of health off the 100 total damage you would take, it's actually only taking off 16 hit points, bringing the total amount of health damage you're dealt from 80 to 64. And then the last 20% damage resistance provided by your third Curio is calculated off of that value of 64 health damage, which means that only 13 hit points are being removed from the base 100 damage you would normally take, and when you subtract 13 to 64, it brings you a total of 51 hit points you would take directly to your health from this pretend sniper shot. That's 11 more points of damage than the 40 you would have taken if the Curio perks calculated additively instead of multiplicatively. For this reason, I've made the Curios on my Hive Scum provide me with extra toughness as my blessing on all 3 of them, but for perks, I only have 2 Curios provide damage reduction from the same type of damage. For me personally, I struggle the most with damage from flamers and damage from poxbursters, so I choose for 2 of my Curios to have damage resistance on bombers and 15% resistance on corruption dealt specifically by enemies. Since by the time I'd have a third Curio providing those same damage resistances, I'd only be gaining an extra 13 hit points of protection for every 100 damage dealt. My third Curio provides me a lot more value if it's giving me 20 hit points of protection on damage from a different type of enemy damage, or other utilitarian stats like 12% increased stamina regeneration and 15% sprint efficiency like I've chosen here. Stamina regen and sprint efficiency actually work with certain talents I've selected in my tree, so now it's time to take a look at that. Like I said in the beginning, since Hive Scum has such versatile options for what they bring to the table in combat, and they were created with a spam dodge playstyle in mind, this build leans heavy into maximizing your dodging potential, increasing the brief invincibility dodging provides you, while making use of extra protection against range damage as a utilitarian skill and potentially helping support the team, deal out consistent melee damage, and not miss out on stacks of damage over time provided by chems. Starting at the top, we have a Tertium Welcome, which does an extra 15% of melee damage against your first enemy hit with each attack. Going back to our shivs, they're an assassination damage profile weapon, meaning they already have mitigated cleave as it is, so we lean into that even more by choosing to buff our first hit damage and forego extra cleave in favor of other talents later in this tree. Precision Violence provides toughness replenishment on each enemy hit in melee, with weak spot, critical hits and weak spot critical hits, providing even more for each type of hit. Float Like a Butterfly brings our critical hit chance up an extra 20% for 3 seconds each successful dodge, which when we're engaged in melee combat is pretty much always up, because in melee we want to always be dodging. Burst of Energy is a talent that I would note as a flex talent on this build, but since this build is most meant to answer the squishy feeling of Hive Scum while also allowing you to have reliably good damage output with melee and ranged, I have it here for the benefit of 50% toughness restoration immediately upon your toughness being broken through, and this Burst of Energy restoration can happen once every 10 seconds. If you feel like you are not hurting for more toughness replenishment, this node is definitely one to consider reallocating to something you might feel more value from, like moving into Swift Endurance and the sweet spot on the lower left portion of this talent tree. Sticky Hands for me is very important because not only do I frequently swap weapons so I can hit tougher problem enemies like Ragers or Crushers with my needle pistols, but it also supports the needle pistol by reducing the spread 30% because again, that gun can suffer a bit from inaccuracy. We have to take a 25 toughness boost, which I will not complain about, and then that brings us to selecting our Blitz. Your Blitz is a very modular choice, and in this build, what you pick affects what talents I recommend taking toward the end of the build. Obviously right now, the chem grenade is busted as fuck. The area of effect on these grenades when thrown is huge, and it deals out literally hundreds of damage per second to anything standing in the affected area. If a Crusher or Bulwark stays in the chem goop constantly after the grenade is thrown, it kills them from full health in about 16 seconds at Auric level difficulty, and at that difficulty level, Crushers have 6,500 hit points. That is insane. If you are confident enough in your dodge timing and play it perfectly, you can throw a chem grenade into the center of a pack of armor, then spend around 20 seconds dancing around their hits in a circle to keep them as packed into the chem radius as possible and kill them all without ever having to land an actual hit on them with your melee. So since the chem grenades are in such a busted state, it's hard to not recommend taking them at every opportunity. They're massively helpful and especially help as a potential emergency exit strategy if you get yourself into a situation where you're cornered by a horde and don't have the space to move out of the trash mobs like poxwalkers. They're also huge for keeping enemies off you in melee if you need to pick up teammates, and a lot of other situational considerations. However, everyone struggles with different things in gameplay, and there is a case to be made for taking any of the Blitz options. For example, if you find that one of your pain points is you sometimes bite off more than you can end up chewing when it comes to engaging with packs of elites or getting into gunner faces, and you struggle with being able to disengage out of them, blackout grenades should be your go-to. The added bonus of blackouts is that you don't have to rely on finding grenade pickups because you'll gain grenades back over time for every 20 kills you make. If you find yourself on teams that struggle with finishing off bosses or handling packs of armor like Crushers consistently, and you don't feel confident in your ability to dodge them while they burn down in the chem grenade puddle, you should be looking at the Boombringer for its immense instant damage output. Blitz is the place in this build where the option is totally flexible depending on your preferred playstyle or combat situation you struggle with. If you don't take the chem grenades, you'll want to give heavy consideration to taking one of the nodes that I note in this build is a flex node, and instead using that point to allocate it into Pocket Toxin on the lower right hand side of the skill tree. That way, no matter what Blitz ability you choose, it will always apply chem dots on the target. From Blitzes, we're required to take Gang Tough, and for the next node that I would call a flex option, there's Slippery Customer. This grants you immunity from melee attack damage while you're in a slide, which is hugely valuable. But if you're still working on getting dodging down and don't even really do much with sliding except for to try to keep your stamina up while sprinting, you may not find that you get much use out of this talent. I'll be honest, I sure as hell don't myself, but it's something that I'm trying to learn how to work on so I can maximize my value out of it and learn how to avoid taking even more damage. If you opt not to take Slippery Customer, you'll want to take Nimble. Nimble makes your your dodges physically move you in the direction you dodge a little bit further, and also gives you a little more time where you're invulnerable to damage. So if you're working on your dodging, or this is your first time you'll be trying out a dodge spamming playstyle, I recommend this one almost as training wheels. You'll still be actively getting your muscle memory for dodge cadence and rhythm down, but hopefully not getting quite as punished in melee. It's also super handy for extending your ability to close the gap on gunners without getting shredded. As a very important side note, Nimble is actually currently bugged in the early life of the Hive Scum. My intention for this build video is that it will exist and be helpful for much longer than this skill will be bugged in the game, so I do recommend it to take for Hive Scum, especially if you're a beginner with dodging, but in the early weeks of this class being out, be sure you give it a quick Google search to confirm if the bug has been fixed before you throw it on your talent tree. Jittery is super important for making sure that you have your dodges up and available as often as you can. Make sure when you use your last dodge to give yourself a mental 1 Mississippi or something like that to remind yourself to pause on them briefly so you can recover full dodges. His but a scratch is helpful if you find yourself getting shot to pieces and shattering your toughness while either moving to your next point of cover in a map or trying to handle a melee combat situation you can't get out of while also being in a line of fire. Untouchable is a flex node, but it can be quite helpful as a utilitarian team support talent. Yes, you absolutely can abuse it to sprint off and leave your teammates to deal with enemies that drop threat on you and instead focus on them, but that would make you a dick. Instead, use Untouchable as an opportunity to flank on enemies that are being a problem for your whole team. For example, if the other 3 people in your party are locked into fighting a chaos spawn and your damage isn't really needed there, but there is a line of Reapers off to the side firing into that boss fight, Untouchable can grant you an opportunity to responsibly split off to chuck a grenade at those gunners or to hit them with your needle pistol. This seems like a good time to pause and say that Hive Scum shines best when you are playing in cohesion with your team. Obviously, as you climb difficulty levels in Darktide, moments where making a correct call to split off and tie up enemies comes up more often, especially if you feel confident you can insert yourself in a situation and finish the job without going down. But it is never a good idea to use the extra mobility of Hive Scum to run ahead of your team or to try to play like a lone wolf. I play Darktide with the community consistently, generally at least 3 times per week, and I see a pattern in people that commonly complain about Hive Scum being an outright bad class, and players that I see actively not having awareness of where their team is or wanting to jump into a room full of gunners solo before anyone is there to follow them up. If you are finding yourself struggling with the survivability of Hive Scum, one of the first things to check for adjustment is how well you play with your team, not in spite of them. When built right and played well, Hive Scum can be a class that's able to pull off solo clutch situations, but lone wolf gameplay is incredibly hard to sustain with this class. So please know that my official stance on these mobility talents is that you should not be using them to run ahead and solo everything or steal kills from your team. What you should be doing is using them when the chips are down and your team needs a hero that can enter a messy combat situation without getting hurt, giving your team the opportunity to follow you up, sweep in, and clean up what remains. Helping your team is what helps you and ultimately wins missions. And on that note, fuck your team! Take Ruffian for your aura instead of ammo sharing with improved Gunslinger because you want extra melee damage where you can get it. Sharing is caring, but that's someone else's problem to care about. And you won't need to stress over ammo as much because for your combat ability, you're taking Enhanced Desperado. This is without fail the #1 thing that everyone questions me on about this build. Why the hell am I taking Enhanced Desperado, especially when I use the needle pistol? That's a fair question, and I have a feeling a lot of people are going to disagree with me on principle over this, which is fine. I take Enhanced Desperado not to mag dump ammo into the faces of hordes. I use shivs for horde clearing most of the time and generally reserve my ranged weapons for gunners and elites. Instead, I use Enhanced Desperado as a fuck these heretics button when our team is in a situation where it's helpful. Sometimes that's being able to put myself into a heavy gunner area to start cleaning it out, like open atriums on the carnival missions. It's incredibly handy to have in being able to pick up teammates either from a down state or at the respawn locations if they die outright. Often picking up down teammates will be under heavy gunner fire, or when you go to the resurrection effigy post, it will have multiple elites you have to contend with. Popping Desperado in those moments means you're completely immune to gunfire and can dump entire clips of your needler ammo into elites that may be preventing you from rezzing your friends. Having the freedom to dump an entire clip of dots into them without actually costing you any ammo means they drop quickly. You also don't have to worry as much about the age-old conundrum: what happens if I have a gunlugger ogre on my team that vacuums up all the ammo before I get to it? With Desperado, you're guaranteed that at least every 45 seconds, you will have a fail-safe supply of ammunition at your disposal for a minimum of 10 seconds. And by taking the focused resolve ability modifier, any highlighted enemies you killed during Desperado counts toward your cooldown to get to your next Desperado faster, even if you kill them with melee. Being 100% entirely invulnerable to range attacks including Reapers, elite gunners, shotgunners, snipers, plasma gunners, and even both the damage and push from enemies like Rodent and Captains is huge. The higher you get in game difficulty, the harder even the basic trash gunners can be to contend with, so having a fuck you button where you can situationally choose to just ignore them can absolutely be the difference between failing a run or pulling off a clutch, or even just surviving and hanging in with your team to the next Medicae station. Alright, we're in the home stretch now. Rounding out this tree, I've chosen to take the Adrenaline Keystone. We have our ranged damage survivability and guaranteed ammo reserves from Desperado, with the understanding that both the Needler Pistol and Desperado are meant as more utilitarian pieces of our arsenal to help punch down elites and be available to either pick up teammates or be the team linchpin to put yourself in potentially dangerous situations and start clearing a room before the rest of your team comes in to support. But when it comes to surviving against hordes and smaller numbers of elites that you feel confident in handling in melee combat, Adrenaline and the supporting talents in this middle bottom section of the tree are key. For each melee hit you get on an enemy, you gain 1 stack of Adrenaline. Critical hits grant 2. Not hitting an enemy for 2 seconds will remove a stack of Adrenaline. At a total of 30 stacks, your Keystone activates called Adrenaline Frenzy, and you get 10% increased attack speed and an extra 25% melee damage. Normally, the frenzy lasts for 10 seconds, but we're going to take Stoked Rage and extend that to 20 seconds. During this 20-second active frenzy, you'll be replenishing 5% of your toughness per second by taking Adrenaline Unbound. Combine this with the constantly dodging around groups of hordes while you're actively in combat with them, and you should be regaining plenty of toughness to mitigate any that you might lose from taking a single hit. This turns you into a melee combat horde mulcher. You can light attack even larger melee enemies like Crushers, and again, if you're consistently dodging in a circle around them, be stacking Adrenaline off of these tougher enemies to help you get into the next frenzy. This build doesn't take Adrenaline Smiter or Adrenaline Assassin because it removes your ability to stack Adrenaline off of regular melee hits, and using the shivs plus attack speed you gain from the Cartel Stim, which we'll get to in a minute, you have such a good amount of attack speed that you want to be able to just consistently score Adrenaline stacks off of regular melee hits. I personally also skip Uncontrolled Aggression because if I'm not hitting an enemy within 2 seconds, we're probably not in deep enough melee combat where I'm going to be getting an Adrenaline Frenzy anyways, but you may decide to take it depending on your preferred playstyle. To get to the Keystone, we take Hive City Brawler. This grants you up to 20% damage reduction and an extra 20% melee damage depending on how much stamina you have available. This leans into giving you extra survivability by helping mitigate losing health, while Adrenaline Frenzy helps you maintain toughness. Hyper Violence gives you an extra boost to your melee damage output every time you kill an enemy, which you'll be doing a lot, scoring all the weak spot hits, critical hits and critical weak spot hits provided by your shivs. For your node that gets you into this Keystone branch, punching above one's weight is a good choice if you want even more damage against elites and find yourself getting into melee combat more with monstrosities compared to using your needle gun. Like the Wind is a fine option to make your dodging and ability to avoid attacks, especially gunners, even more efficient. Cheap shots isn't a bad option to take if you choose the blackout grenades for your Blitz ability, as you can use them to knock enemies down and then move in for the kill with an extra 15% of damage on them. I personally don't use battering strikes because, again, we pretty much build everything on this build to focus more on single target and first target damage, but if you want to take it for the added cleave, that isn't a bad or wrong choice by any means. We have 6 points left to spend, and I use them by going over into the right side of the tree and picking up some of the chem talents. Extra pouches gives you an extra blitz charge, and if you took either Boombringer or the blackout grenades, I super recommend pocket toxins so your blitz is applying 3 stacks of chem toxins to affected enemies. This has made the difference for me, especially when hitting monstrosities with Boombringer, where the initial damage from the explosion isn't enough to kill the boss outright, but the chem toxins finish it off without anyone having to do further damage to it. Toxmania gives you an extra 5% base damage for each enemy affected by chem toxins nearby, up to a maximum of 15%. If you took the chem grenades, this is an especially great choice since you'll likely be putting them down in heavy horde and elite pack situations. Toxic Renewal replenishes 15% toughness when an enemy affected by chem toxins is killed with a melee attack, which synergizes well with our shivs and the extra crit and weak spot hits we should be scoring. Targeted Toxin is a flex pick that will decrease the amount of damage elites and monstrosities deal out not just to you, but to your whole team when they are affected by chem toxins, so especially if you struggle with ragers or monstrosities, this could be a viable choice. Overall, picking up the dodge talents I've outlined and the toughness replenishment should hopefully help mitigate the overall squishiness many people feel with Hive Scum. It's still a glass cannon character, so nothing will ever take it away entirely, but especially with honing your skill and getting a feel for dodge cadence and rhythm, you should find that you're getting hit a lot less and feeling it a lot less when an enemy does land a blow on you. I personally have pulled off many clutches on Auric and Damnation difficulty when playing the ultimate Hive Scum, and this build also holds up decently in Havoc in the difficulty level 20s range. If you've opted to not take some of the flex talents and have points left over, popping them into something that gives you more melee damage or toughness replenishment will just enhance your results on dealing out damage and surviving further. If you have at least 3 points left, consider taking the critical chance boost on the bottom left hand side of the Hive Scum tree and taking Swift Endurance and the Sweet Spot for even more melee attack speed and weak spot damage with your shivs. I do use the Cartel Special Stim, which is the stim you can personalize and replace being able to pick up stims in maps. If you want to use all of your points for the stim lab, I recommend taking the Spur line all the way into Fervor for your 5-point cost enhancement and the Coma line into Hypex to help yourself have Desperado up even more often. But you don't have to use all of your stim lab points, and some people specifically recommend against it so you can have your stim available more often. If you try out this build, let me know what you think. Did it make any difference in your survivability with your Hive Scum character or change how you think about playing it at all? Hopefully this was at least a little bit helpful and maybe you even learned something new about how Darktide operates mechanically. Thanks for watching, and until next time when, yes, I promise I will talk about the Gene Stealer symbol on the paper in the new operation, I'll see you out there against the Darktide. Thanks so much for watching and for all of your support. Special shout out to my top supporters, Leah S., Andrew Brown, Kabis, Rich, William McQueen, Ben, Darkslide, Cameron, Commander Orf, Ginge Dread, Yellow 13, Ripped Limbo, El Zunix, Sam Walcroft, Sam Spry, Macaroni Tuesday, The Speedy Turtle 4, Vegas Moxie, Din Fairy, Freakazoid, Sem D85, Lord Pingu, Am I Here or There? Mr. Schrodinger, Jason Clark, Gamer Master 234, CTQZ1MF, Evan Berger, Harbinger, Bad Cat, Dark Slide, Kron Chaos, the Fargos, the Thunder Guardian, Aubrey Bessie, the Real Kazan, and Makrove.